He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Korean Mafia boss leaned toward his associate and spoke Korean on purpose, not to communicate, to humiliate the black female bodyguard standing beside him. They laughed. She stayed silent. And that's when he made the worst mistake of his life. Because when she finally replied, she replied fluently. The private room smelled of expensive leather, stale cigar smoke, and the kind of whiskey that costs more than my father made in a year. It was a heavy, suffocating smell, designed to make you feel small. Designed to remind you that you were in the presence of money and power. I stood in the corner, my back pressed against the dark velvet wallpaper, trying to make myself invisible. My hands were clasped behind my back in the parade rest position I had learned in the military and perfected in private security. My eyes were fixed on a point on the far wall, somewhere between a painting of a tiger and a sconce that looked like gold leaf. I was a statue. I was furniture. To the men in the room, I was just a large, dark object that took up space. Minjun sat in the center of the semicircular leather booth. He was the Korean Mafia boss, a man whose reputation was whispered about in the back alleys of Seoul and shouted about in the police stations. He didn't look like a thug. That was the scary part. He looked like a prince. He wore a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the top to reveal the edge of a dragon tattoo that crawled up his neck like a warning. His hair was perfectly styled, his skin was flawless, and his eyes were like chips of black ice. He was a feared leader, an untouchable boss who moved through the world as if he owned the pavement he walked on. Next to him was Taeyong. If Minjun was the lion, Taeyong was the hyena. He was younger, louder, and desperate for approval. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. He kept pouring drinks, his hands shaking slightly, laughing too hard at everything the boss said. They were comfortable. They were relaxed. And why wouldn't they be? They were in their own private kingdom, guarded by a heavy oak door and me. I adjusted the earpiece in my left ear, listening to the static of the comms channel. Nothing. The perimeter was secure. My job was simple. Stand there. Look intimidating. Take a bullet if necessary. I was a black female bodyguard, a visible deterrent hired by the syndicate because I stood out. Minjun took a slow sip of his amber liquid, his eyes sliding over to me. It wasn't a look of acknowledgement. It was the way a person looks at a strange animal in a zoo. He swirled the ice in his glass, the clinking sound sharp in the quiet room. Then he leaned toward Taeyong. Look at it, Minjun said. He didn't speak in English. He switched to Korean smoothly, effortlessly. He spoke Korean on purpose. He knew I was American. He knew I was hired through an international agency. He assumed, with the arrogance of a man who has never been told no, that the language barrier was a steel wall. Whatever possessed us to hire a woman. Taeyong replied in Korean, snickering into his glass. Especially one so large. It's about image, Minjun drawled, his voice a low rumble. A black woman in power, or at least one wearing a suit, scares the locals. They see her and they think she is some sort of special forces commando. She looks like she could crush a melon with one hand, Taeyong laughed. But does she have a brain? Or is it just muscle and bone? I didn't blink. I didn't twitch. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. Calm confidence was the only weapon I was allowed to carry in here. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were playing a game of humiliation. They were bored, and I was the entertainment. Minjun smirked, looking me up and down with open disdain. She stands so still. like a cow in a field, chewing on nothing. Do you think she knows we are talking about her? Taeyong asked, glancing at me with a cruel grin. Of course not, Minjun scoffed. Look at her eyes. Empty. She is thinking about. I don't know. Fried chicken? Isn't that what they like? The racism was casual. It was easy for them. It flowed out of their mouths alongside the expensive liquor. They were trying to humiliate me, to strip away my dignity layer by layer. They saw an underestimated black woman and decided I was less than human. They saw my skin and my gender and decided I was deaf, dumb, and blind. If you are enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. I felt a spark of heat in my chest. It started in my stomach and worked its way up to my throat. It was the burning desire to speak, to react, to snap his neck. But I pushed it down. I buried it deep under years of training. Emotional discipline is the difference between a professional and a liability. If I reacted, I lost. If I showed emotion, they won. So I stayed silent. I let the disrespect wash over me. I remained the quiet black woman they expected. I let them think they were safe. I let them think they were the smartest men in the room. Minjun laughed again, a dark, rich sound. She is just a prop, Taeyong. A decoration. Like that vase over there. Except the vase is prettier. They clinked their glasses together, toasting to their own cleverness, completely unaware that the prop in the corner was recording every single word. The hour dragged on, slow and agonizing. The air in the room grew heavier with smoke, turning into a blue haze that hung around the chandelier. The two men drank more. They loosened their ties. They kicked their feet up. The barrier between boss and subordinate thinned as the whiskey did its work, but the barrier between them and me only grew thicker. They had forgotten I was a person. To them, I was just part of the architecture. A black professional woman in a suit was just a backdrop for their evening. The suit is terrible, Minjun muttered in Korean, his eyes drowsy but sharp. Who tailored that? It looks like she is wearing a tent. Maybe they don't make suits for women that size, Taeyong giggled, his face flushed red from the alcohol. She is built like a tank. A tank in a tuxedo. It is an insult to the brand, Minjun agreed, swirling his drink. I should have her stand outside. She is ruining the aesthetic of the room. I kept my jaw unclenched, though my teeth wanted to grind together. I focused on the rhythm of my heartbeat. Thump thump. Thump thump. I focused on the exits. I focused on the job. My job was protection. Even if the person I was protecting was a bigot. Even if he was a monster. That was the contract. But as the alcohol flowed, the conversation shifted. It moved away from my appearance and into dangerous territory. They became sloppy. They became careless. They assumed that their linguistic fortress was impenetrable. Minjun sat up straighter, shaking his head to clear the fog of the drink. Enough about the giant, he muttered. Business. The shipment. It arrives tonight. My ears didn't move, but my attention sharpened to a razor point. This was crime syndicate business. This was the dark heart of the Korean underworld. Tonight? Taeyong asked, blinking. I thought it was next week. The timeline moved up, Minjun said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. The supplier is nervous. He wants to offload at the docks. Section 4. Section 4. Taejong looked nervous. He switched to English for a brief second, looking at me. More ice. Now. I moved instantly. I didn't sigh. I didn't roll my eyes. I walked to the silver bucket, scooped fresh ice cubes into his glass with the silver tongs, and stepped back to my corner. I moved with quiet dominance, efficient, silent, invisible. "Thank you," he muttered in English, dismissive. Then he switched back to Korean immediately. "Is Section 4 safe?" "The police." "The police are paid," Minjun interrupted in Korean. "The captain is on the payroll. He will have his men looking the other way." "But—" He paused, a dark shadow crossing his face. "But what?" "The rival family. The Jang clan. They have been sniffing around. If they find out we are moving the product tonight, it could be a bloodbath." "We have security," Taeyong said, glancing at me. Minjun followed his gaze. He looked at me with a cold, calculating stare. It wasn't the look of a man looking at a protector. It was the look of a man looking at a tool. A disposable tool. "We have her," Minjun said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "If the shooting starts, we use her." "Use her." "She is the meat shield," Minjun said calmly. "She is big. She covers a lot of space. If the bullets fly, you push her in front. You get behind her. That is what she is for. That is why we hired a foreigner." I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She chose silence, but it was getting harder. "Think about it," Minjun continued, gesturing at me with his glass. "If a Korean guard dies, his family asks questions. There is a funeral. There is guilt. But her? If she dies, who cares? She is just a black female driver or guard. No one will miss her. She is disposable." The word hung in the air like poison smoke. Disposable. He wasn't just mocking me anymore. He was planning my death. He was strategizing how to use my body to save his own skin. He saw me as nothing more than biological armor. "Smart," Taeyong chuckled, nodding enthusiastically. "Very smart, boss. You think of everything." "She stands there," Minjun said, shaking his head. "Dumb, deaf, blind. She has no idea she is already dead. She probably thinks we are discussing the weather." Please take a second to like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. He looked me right in the eyes. He smiled. It was a smile of pure arrogance, a smile that said, "I own you." He was socially humiliating me in a way that cut deeper than any insult. He was laughing at my life. He assumed she didn't understand. He bet his entire existence on it. I looked back at him. I didn't glare. I didn't cry. I just watched. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the most dangerous thing in the room. I was gathering reconnaissance. I was learning his plans. I was learning the location, Section 4. I was learning the timing. I was learning that he had enemies. And most importantly, I was learning that he was wrong. He thought he was the hunter, teasing a trapped animal in a cage. He didn't realize he had just locked himself in the cage with a lioness. He laughed again, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Hey," he said in English, snapping his fingers at me like I was a dog. "You. Happy?" I nodded once, stiffly. My face remained a mask. "Yes, sir." "Good," he laughed, switching back to Korean. "Stupid woman. She smiles while we plan her funeral. She is simpler than a child." My hands curled into fists behind my back, the leather of my gloves creaking softly. The bucket was full. The disrespect had overflowed. I had heard enough. The atmosphere in the room was electric with arrogance. Minjun was leaning back, his legs stretched out under the table, feeling like the king of the world. He had spent the last hour tearing me down, confident that his words were hitting a brick wall. He felt safe. He felt superior. Taeyong, Minjun said in Korean, his voice slurred slightly from the whiskey. Ask her if she likes Korean food. Ask her if she knows what kimchi is. I bet she thinks it is a type of car. Or maybe a planet. Taeyong giggled, clearly drunk on the proximity to power. He loved this game. He loved kicking someone who couldn't kick back. Boss, you're terrible. You're so mean. I am honest, Minjun smirked. Ask her. I want to hear her try to say it. It will be funny. Taeyong turned to me. He put on a fake, patronizing smile. He switched to broken, slow, condescending English, speaking loud as if I were deaf. Hey, you like spicy food? You know, kimchi? I looked at him. I looked at his sloppy tie, his sweaty face. Then I looked at Minjun. Minjun was watching me with that same smug grin, waiting. He was expecting me to nod dumbly. He was expecting me to stutter out a simple yes or no. He was waiting for the final humiliation, the punchline to his joke. This was the moment, the tipping point, the mistake. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. I could hear the traffic outside on the street, muffled by the heavy curtains. I took a breath. I let my posture shift. I didn't slump. I grew taller. I expanded my chest. The calm confidence I had been holding back flooded into my veins. I dropped the mask of the dumb hired help. I looked Minjun directly in the eyes. I didn't look at his chin or his nose. I looked into his soul. Kimchi is fermented cabbage, usually seasoned with chili powder, garlic, ginger, and jiakgul, sir, I said. But I didn't say it in English. I said it in fluent Korean. The sound of my voice cut through the room like a razor blade slicing through silk. It was perfect. The intonation was Seoul standard, with just a hint of the Busan dialect I had picked up from my years living there. The grammar was impeccable. I used the correct honorifics, giving him the high respect his rank demanded, which only made the sting worse. It was the language of a native, spoken by the woman he called a cow. Everything changed in a split second. Minjun's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was like someone had slapped the expression off his face. The glass in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide, the pupils contracting into pinpricks. He stopped laughing. Taeyong choked on his drink. He started coughing violently, hacking and sputtering as he stared at me in horror, whiskey dripping down his chin. I didn't stop. I didn't stutter. I didn't retreat. And I continued, my voice smooth and controlled, still speaking native-level Korean. I would advise against Section 4 at the docks tonight. The police shift changes at 2 a.m., but the harbor master is new. He is a man named Detective Choi. He hasn't been bribed yet. He is strictly by the book. If you go to Section 4, you won't just meet the Jang clan. You will meet the SWAT team. You would be walking into a trap. The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier than the heavy oak door, thicker than the cigar smoke. The room went silent. Absolutely silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. You could hear Taeyong wheezing. Minjun stared at me. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The shocked expression on his face was a masterpiece. The Korean Mafia boss, the man who feared nothing, looked like he had seen a ghost. He looked like the floor had just vanished beneath his feet. He realized too late. The truth came too late. He had spent the last hour insulting me. He had called me a cow, a tent, a prop. He had threatened me. He had planned my death. He had called me stupid. And I had heard every word. I had understood everything. I wasn't just a bodyguard. I was an intelligent Black woman who had spent 5 years in South Korea working high-level security details. I had studied the language at a university level. I had immersed myself in the culture. I knew the slang. I knew the politics. I had mastered his world while he was busy mocking mine. You, Minjun whispered in Korean. His voice cracked. It was a weak sound. The dangerous man sounded like a frightened child caught stealing candy. You understand. I kept my face impassive. No emotion. No pride. Just cold, hard facts. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I understand everything, sir, I replied in Korean, my pronunciation crisp and clear. I understand that my suit fits poorly. I understand that I am a meat shield. I understand that I am disposable. And I understand that you underestimated me. Subscribe right now if you think you deserve that. Taeyong looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. He was pale, sweating profusely. He had been laughing the loudest, and now he was the most exposed. He looked at Minjun, terrified of the fallout. Minjun slowly set his glass down on the table. His hand was shaking. Just a little. But I saw it. The power shifted. It flowed away from the man in the expensive suit and settled on the woman standing in the corner. He looked at me with new eyes. He didn't see a novelty anymore. He didn't see furniture. He saw a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. He saw an equal. Why? He asked in Korean, his voice barely audible. Why didn't you speak? Why did you let us say those things? Because you didn't ask, sir, I said simply. And because a bodyguard listens more than she speaks. Information is protection. And tonight, my silence gave me the information to save you from arrest. I let the words hang there. It was a lesson in emotional control. I hadn't let my anger control me. I hadn't snapped when he called me names. I had waited. I had waited for the moment of maximum impact. The unexpected reply had shattered his reality. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a color or a gender. He saw a force of nature. The air in the room crackled with tension. Watch his face when he realizes the depth of his error. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was fear. He had revealed his crimes, his plans, and his weaknesses to a stranger. He had handed me the keys to his destruction, thinking I didn't know how to drive. Section 4, he muttered, his mind racing, trying to catch up. How do you know about the harbor master? I do my job, sir, I said, maintaining my quiet dominance. I research the locations. I scan the local news. I protect the principal, even when the principal thinks I am disposable. Even when the principal laughs at me, the word hit him like a physical slap. He flinched. He actually flinched. This is where everything changed. The dynamic of the room had flipped upside down. The boss was no longer the boss. The servant was the master of the situation. I stood tall, my hands clasped behind my back. I was the only one in the room who was calm. I was the only one who was in control. And I watched as the great Korean Mafia boss struggled to find his voice in his own language, humbled by the Black female bodyguard he had tried to break. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle, snapping with every second that passed. Minjun looked at me, really looked at me, for a long time. He was processing the shock. He was recalculating everything he thought he knew about the world. He was a man who prided himself on reading people, on seeing the angles, and he had missed the biggest angle in the room. Sit, he said. It wasn't a command. It was a request. An invitation. I prefer to stand, sir, I replied in Korean. I am on duty. Sit, he repeated, his voice firmer but lacking the mockery from before. He pointed to the empty leather seat across from him. Please. The word please was foreign in his mouth. It sounded rusty. A man like him didn't say please to the help. A man like him didn't say please to anyone. I hesitated for a second, weighing the situation. Then, with deliberate slowness, I unclasped my hands. I walked over to the booth and sat down. I sat straight, keeping my posture perfect, my eyes locked on his. Power doesn't shout. It waits. Taeyong was staring at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. He was terrified. He knew that if I wanted to, I could ruin him. I had heard every insult he had laughed at. I held his reputation in my hands. Minjun poured a new glass of whiskey. He didn't pour it for himself. He pushed it across the table toward me. You speak the dialect, he said, studying my face as if seeing it for the first time. Busan? It is faint, but I hear it. I lived there for 5 years, I answered, ignoring the drink. I was security detail for a tech executive. I learned the language because I needed to know if people were planning to kidnap him. It is a useful skill. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask. You assumed. He let out a short, incredulous breath. He looked at the dragon tattoo on his hand, then back at me. He was trying to reconcile the black woman in power sitting in front of him with the stereotype he had built in his head. Don't forget to boost this video by leaving a like. You heard the insults, he said flatly. About the suit. About the meat shield. Yes. And yet, you warned me about the docs. You warned me about the police. I am a professional, I said. My feelings are irrelevant. My job is to keep you alive. If you walk into a trap at the docks, I fail. I don't like to fail. And if you get arrested, I don't get paid. Minjun leaned back, a flicker of genuine admiration in his eyes. He respected strength. He respected intelligence. And he respected emotional discipline because he knew how hard it was to maintain. He knew that any other person would have lashed out or quit or sulked. But I had done the job. You're dangerous, he murmured. A dangerous woman. Only to those who threaten my principle, I said. Or to those who underestimate you, he corrected. The power rebalance was complete. He wasn't looking down on me anymore. He was looking across at me. We were equals in this moment. The hierarchy of the Korean underworld had been suspended. Taeyong, Minjun barked, the sudden noise making the associate jump in his seat. Yes, boss. Taeyong squeaked, his voice trembling. Get out. Boss? Taejong looked confused. But the meeting. Leave the room, Minjun said, his voice cold and hard as steel. Go wait in the car. You are embarrassing me. Taeyong scrambled up. He bowed frantically to Minjun. Then he paused. He looked at me. He didn't know what to do. The old rules were gone. Then, slowly, he bowed to me. It was a deep bow. A respectful bow. The kind of bow you give to a superior. I apologize, he stammered in Korean. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He grabbed his coat and fled the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Now it was just the two of us. The Korean Mafia boss and the underestimated black woman. The harbor master, Minjun said, his voice serious now. Is there another route? We have to move the product tonight. Section 2 is clear, I said immediately. Industrial waste disposal. It smells, so the regular patrols avoid it. And the security cameras on the west gate are broken. I checked them this morning. You can move the shipment through there within 20 minutes. It is ugly, but it is safe. He nodded slowly. He was testing me, and I was passing. I was proving that I wasn't just fluent in the language, I was fluent in the business. I was intelligent. I was strategic. I was an asset he had almost thrown away. You saved me money tonight, he said. And probably my life. If the Jang clan was waiting at Section 4. They were, I said. I saw a scout car from the Jang family 2 blocks from the Section 4 entrance when we drove past earlier. You missed it because you were talking. He grimaced. I missed it because I was arrogant. Yes, I said. He didn't get angry at the confirmation. He accepted it. It is more than the job, he said. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. Most people would have let me walk into the trap, especially after what I said. They would have let me die just to spite me. I am not most people. No, he agreed. You're not. He picked up his glass and held it up. A toast. To silence, he said in English. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Quiet dominance filled the space between us. I didn't need his toast. I didn't need his approval. I had taken his disrespect and turned it into a weapon. He drank. I watched. The atmosphere changed permanently. I knew that when we walked out of this room, things would be different. He would never speak over me again. He would never assume I was invisible. He had learned that the person standing in the shadows often sees the most. He had learned that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and the quietest is the one you need to worry about. We left the club 20 minutes later. The walk to the car was different. Before, I had trailed behind him like a shadow, ignored and forgotten. Now he walked slightly slower, keeping me in his peripheral vision. It wasn't out of suspicion. It was out of awareness. He was acknowledging my presence. He was making sure I was there. As we stepped out into the cool Seoul night, the neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement, the other bodyguards were waiting. They were all men, all Korean. They looked at Minjun, then at me, expecting the usual dynamic. They expected me to go to the follow car or to stand by the trunk. Minjun stopped at the back door of the black limousine. Usually, I would rush to open it for him. That was the protocol. I stepped forward to reach for the handle, but he held up a hand. No, he said in Korean. The other guards froze. The lead driver looked confused. Minjun looked at the lead driver. She rides in the back with me. The driver's jaw dropped. Boss? But protocol. She is security. New protocol, Minjun said, his voice cold and final. She is my personal detail now. She is the only one who listens. The rest of you just talk. He opened the door himself. He held it open. He gestured for me to get in. It was a small gesture, but in the world of the Korean underworld, it was an earthquake. The boss never opens the door, especially not for the hired help, especially not for a foreigner. It was a public declaration of a shift in status. I got in. I sat on the plush leather seat. He slid in next to me. As the car pulled away, gliding through the neon-lit streets of the city, the silence in the car wasn't tense anymore. It was companionable. It was the silence of two people who understood exactly where they stood. Minjun pressed a button on the intercom. Change of plans. We're going to Section 2. And call the harbor master at Section 4. Tell him he is replaced. Tell him to expect a visit. He released the button and looked at me. Section 2. You're sure? I'm always sure about security, sir. I checked the logs myself. He chuckled. A real laugh this time, not the cruel cackle from the bar. It was a tired laugh, the laugh of a man who realized how close he had come to the edge. I believe you. He looked out the window at the passing city. What is your name? You have my file, sir, I said. It was on your desk. I didn't read the file, he admitted, looking at his reflection in the glass. I looked at the picture. I saw a black woman. I saw a stranger. I made a judgment. I was wrong. Tell me your name. Jordan, I said. Jordan, he repeated. He said it with respect. He didn't mock the pronunciation. He tasted the syllables. Jordan. It is a good name. Strong. It means to flow down, I said. Like a river. And rivers can be dangerous, he mused. They can drown you if you do not respect the current. He turned to face me fully. The streetlights flickered over his face, illuminating the dragon tattoo. Tonight, you taught me a lesson, he said quietly. I thought language was my wall. I thought it kept me safe from outsiders. But you walked right through it. Walls don't work if you leave the gate open, I said. He smiled. Taeyong, he will not be joining us anymore. He talks too much. He thinks too little. I need people who think. Comment below what you think happened to Taeyong. The consequence of that night rippled out for months. The Korean Mafia is a world built on hierarchy and tradition, but Minjun broke tradition. Taeyong was demoted to guarding a warehouse in the countryside, far away from the city and the whiskey. I became the head of Minjun's personal security detail. The other men grumbled at first. They didn't like taking orders from a woman, let alone a foreigner. But when they saw how the boss treated me, with absolute trust and deference, they fell in line. They realized that disrespecting me was disrespecting him. I was no longer the black female driver. I was the right hand. I sat in meetings where millions of dollars were moved. I stood by his side during negotiations with rival clans. I was there when he expanded his empire. And every time a new associate or a rival boss tried to speak in code, tried to use a dialect they thought I didn't know, or tried to insult me in Korean thinking I was just a dumb bodyguard, Minjun would just smile. He wouldn't get angry. He wouldn't shout. He would just look at them, then look at me. Be careful, he would say to them in Korean, his voice silky and dangerous. She hears everything. And she remembers everything. It became our inside joke. Our weapon. People started to fear me. Not just because I was strong, but because I was the silent vault of all their secrets. They stopped seeing me as furniture and started seeing me as a sphinx. I never forgot the look on his face that night in the private room. The shock. The fear. The realization that he was naked in front of someone he thought was blind. It was a lesson in humility that a man like him rarely learned, and it saved his life. And I never let him forget it. I didn't have to use words to remind him. I just had to stand there. Silent. Watchful. Quiet dominance isn't about shouting orders. It isn't about violence. It's about knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. It's about letting them dig their own grave with their insults and then quietly handing them the shovel. Minjun thought he had hired a shield. He found out he had hired a sword. And in a world full of noise and empty threats, he realized that the most valuable thing he possessed was the woman who knew when to speak, and more importantly, when to stay silent. That day, the Korean Mafia boss learned something he never forgot. Never assume silence means ignorance, especially when it belongs to a black woman who chose not to speak.